Welcome back. I'm your host, Glen Alex, and this is The Glen Alex Show, the 2023 Positive Change Podcast Award winner. Each episode of The Glen Alex Show focuses on a different aspect of health because I believe in total health. And I am on a mission to help you be more joyful, connected, confident, and complete the life experience I call wealth, WELLTH, which is health plus other riches. And I am excited about this episode because I am going to learn some things. And we're going to talk about a really tough topic, which is about individual health and safety, and is also about social and global health, human trafficking. So please help me welcome my guest, Amanda Blackwood. Hi, Amanda.
Hello, how are you doing today?
I am doing well. Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you for making time to educate us and share some of your experience and wisdom about this really tragic topic.
Absolutely. And thank you for giving the voice of survivors a place to be able to be heard. There's so many of us that have been silenced.
Well, that's unfortunate. That is really unfortunate because how are we going to help people heal if we don't hear them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. But well, before we dive in too deeply, take a minute, introduce yourself, tell us who you are and what you do.
So I am an advocate for other survivors of human trafficking out here in Colorado and basically anywhere that I can be. My name that I'm known by is Amanda Blackwood, but of course, for my own personal safety, that is not my legal name. It's important that people understand that so they don't reach out and try to find me in my personal life. They can reach out through my websites, they can reach out through social media, but my personal life is kept completely separate. I am very happily married to an incredible man. We have 6 cats. And between the two of us, we have 3 children. So my son is turning 23 years old as this recording is being made. This
Oh,
is actually
wow.
his birthday right
Happy
now.
birthday.
And then his kids, he's got a 26-year-old and a 23-year-old. And the oldest is expecting her first child by the end of the year. So we're going to be grandparents.
Oh, congratulations all around. Wow, that's awesome. That is awesome. Now, you know what? That never even occurred to me that you would need an alias to remain safe.
Yeah. And this is actually the first time that I've brought that up, and I'm not sure why I did, but I just felt like it was important. For some reason somebody out there needs to know that you can be an advocate and you can speak up without having to give away every detail of your personal life.
Okay. Boy, that just gave me chills. Okay. Maybe I'll come back to that when I settle down on some on the inside. Okay. So do you want to share your story, how you
Sure.
were pulled into human trafficking?
So it's really important to also understand what human trafficking is before I get too far down that road.
Okay.
And that's because my story does not look like how it is portrayed in the news or in the media.
Okay.
So, human trafficking, I would say this is something that you don't need to Google, you don't need to look up on Wikipedia. These are fallible resources. You need to go to an actual reputable resource. So, according to the Department of Homeland Security, the definition of human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain labor or sex acts from another person. So if you notice, there's no mention of money, there's no mention of age, and there's no mention of transportation.
Okay.
Human smuggling, prostitution, and age restriction for, only happening to minors. These are all issues that all need to be addressed, but they are not the same thing.
Okay.
So in my case, as is with most survivors, we grow up in very abusive households. So I was molested at 4 years old for the first time, as far as I can remember. This happened repeatedly throughout my teen and preteen years. I was raped by the time I was 17 by somebody that I thought was my best friend. My mother was emotionally very abusive and controlling. My father was physically violent. And that was my entire family growing up, my mom, my dad, and my older brother. And my older brother was the one who molested me. So when you grow up around this environment, you are trained to believe that the people who love you are going to hurt you. And if they don't hurt you, it means they don't love you. They only exist together. And I didn't understand that for a long time. We are, as humans, constantly seeking out human connection. We are looking for, whether we realize it or not, patterns. So I was seeking out these patterns within my own life also. I was looking for what was familiar. When I was 18, I started dating a man who was more than twice my age because he had a familiar pattern that I recognized subconsciously. This was the first person that ever trafficked me. I was trafficked 3 different times in my life. The average number of times that somebody is trafficked is actually 7 times.
Wow. Okay.
A lot of people have asked me, if it happened to you once, didn't you learn anything from it the first time? That's like asking a rape survivor, if you were already raped once, didn't you learn anything from it the first time? Of course, you learn a lot of things from it, but you don't know and you don't learn how to make it stop.
Okay.
So this man basically traded me, I believe, for drugs to his best friend for a birthday weekend in Las Vegas. I was taken to Las Vegas under the premise of believing that this was going to be a fun adventure for me. I was only 18, but I was going to go to New York and ride the roller coaster at the top of the casino. I loved that roller coaster and couldn't wait to do it. And we got there, and instead I was locked up in a small hotel room for 52 hours. I was allowed to have room service only once per day, and the hotel staff were paid off to not ask questions and to drop off that the room service outside of the door and leave before I was allowed to collect it. There was a lot of money exchanged to be able to make sure that what was happening there remained private. This man had my driver's license, well, ID. I didn't have a driver's license at the time. And when he took this, he told me, you're not allowed to leave this room. If you leave the room, you don't have a room key to get back in. So I was kind of stuck. And I had this mindset, which we need to stop telling ourselves, and we really need to stop telling each other. I've been through worse. I can get through this. Because if I didn't have that mindset, I would have thought to myself, this is absolutely terrible. I need to get out of here. I need to go get help right now. But I didn't do that because I told myself, I've been through worse. I can get through this too.
Okay.
Eventually, at the end of this abuse, he would go down and gamble, come up and eat a couple of bites, molest me, and fall asleep for a few hours. And this repeated many times over the 52 hours. At the end of it, we did fly back to where I was living at the time, which was Arizona. And I packed up my stuff and I left as quick as possible. I knew that what had happened was wrong. I did not know that what had happened was considered human trafficking until many years later.
Okay.
20 years went by before I figured that out.
Okay. Okay.
So
let me, but this was the man you were dating.
it was his best friend.
It was his best friend. So you flew to Vegas with the best friend.
Yes.
And the man who you were dating didn't go?
No.
Okay. So he
Yeah.
just basically bamboozled you into this wonderful trip where you'd have a great time, all expenses paid.
Yep. That's
Okay.
exactly it.
Okay. And then when you got back to Arizona, you packed up and left him immediately.
As quick as I could. I didn't have a place to stay right away, but
Okay.
I found somebody to be able to take me in and I left.
Okay. So you did learn that that wasn't okay and you needed to get out.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So the second time I was trafficked, it was just about a year later. I was in Florida at the time. I had gone to stay with my grandmother. I had hurt myself on the job working on a horse farm and I needed knee surgery.
Mm,
And the plan was I was going to stay with her while I got this knee surgery done, which Florida has some of the very best surgeons in this field in the country. So I
okay.
was going to go down there and get surgery from the best, and I was going to recuperate while staying with her and maybe get to know her a little bit. I hadn't really had much of a chance to get to know her.
Okay.
And got all the way down there and got to the Daytona Beach bus station. It was about 10:30 at night. And I called her to let her know, hey, I'm here. I'm ready for you guys to come and get me. Let's start this new adventure, this new chapter. And her husband, my dad's stepfather, answered the phone and said, we're not coming to get you. Good luck. Bye. And I couldn't understand why for a long time. It was years later I found out that my parents had called and said, she's running away from her problems again. And if you take her in, we'll never speak to you again.
Oh my gosh.
So a young couple found me sitting there on the curb, crying my eyes out. I had nowhere to go. I had very few belongings. I had $5 to my name. He was 22. She looked 18. She was 15.
Mm,
I was only 19. And this young couple told me, we've got a place for you to come and stay with us. So come and stay with us until you can get on your feet. But what they really meant was, we've got a place for you to come and stay. Why don't you come stay with us until we can find the highest bidder? This young couple sold me as though I were a belonging. I was actually a modern day slave. I was sold to a man named Esteban for an undisclosed amount of money. And I believe it was somewhere around the price of $90.
oh my gosh. Okay.
I was locked up in a small room for 23 and a half hours with no food, no water, no bathroom facilities. But I was a child of the 80s. And when I was growing up, I had the absolute pleasure of watching MacGyver. The man could fix anything with a paperclip and a rubber band.
Good.
I learned a lot from watching him. I knew that people could think their way out of almost any situation they ever found themselves in. And I MacGyvered my way out of that room.
Holy wow. How?
I used whatever I could at hand. I don't want to go into too many details because that is in the book.
Okay.
And if people go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, they can actually get a free ebook of that book.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so they can get all the details because just telling it, I just don't do it justice. There's so much that went into this,
Okay.
and
Okay.
it's a great adventure.
Well, thank goodness for MacGyver.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've written to Richard Dean Anderson and I've told him that he saved my life, and I've never gotten a response, but I have to believe that he knows.
Hopefully he does.
He's amazing. I was also convinced when I was 12 that I was going to grow up to marry the man. You never know. I ended up marrying a guy who doesn't have an engineering degree but has the brain of an engineer, so close enough, right?
Close enough. Yes.
So when I got out of there, I took off running, and the first person that I saw was actually a female police officer driving a car. And I flagged her down and I screamed at her and I tried to tell her, this is what's happened to me. This is where I've been. And I was right over there. And there's others that are locked up in that same building. And she looked at me like I was completely insane. She did not believe a word that was coming out of my mouth. I was in one of the worst areas of Daytona Beach, Florida at the time. There were a lot of drug addicts. There was a lot of prostitution. There were a lot of issues. And
Okay.
she did not believe me. And
Wow.
I felt completely helpless. And then she saw the man who was coming after me. He was coming after me in a car. I was on foot. And she saw him do an illegal U-turn when he saw me talking to a police officer. And then she went after him.
Okay.
But I never followed up to see if they found the place, if they found the other people, if they arrested him. And I lived with this massive amount of survivor's guilt for years because I didn't go back for anybody else. I am no hero at all. This was all in Florida. So, of course, the first thing I did was the first opportunity I got. I moved all the way out to California. That was as far as you could get from Florida without having a passport.
Yes.
And my plan out there was to eventually, I wanted to become an assistant to somebody important because I thought that was the only way I would ever gain any prominence or any importance myself, was
Okay.
to be tied to somebody else who already had it. If I was important to them, then I was important.
Okay.
I didn't understand that any kind of sense of self value that didn't exist in my world. My value always came from others. And this was about the same time that internet dating and social media and all this stuff kind of rose to prominence. So MySpace, Twitter was starting to come around a few years after that. And I was out in LA during all of this. And I was on Alias and Will and Grace. And I did a bunch of modeling for Harley Davidson and cosmetics companies and stuff. Did a lot of really cool stuff when I was out there.
Okay.
But I was constantly seeking out that human connection, that relationship. And internet dating, I met a man who lived in Scotland who had a beautiful accent. He was a police officer, so he was seen as somebody who was safe. He was very, very smart. I've always been attracted to intelligence. And this man just won me over. And for 7 years, we communicated back and forth, and he saw me doing all these amazing things, and he was cheering me on. He was my biggest cheerleader, my biggest fan. He was great. And after 7 years, I went to go and visit him in Scotland. He came to visit me in California. He finally asked me to get a fiance visa and move to California to go and be with him and to marry him and to spend the rest of my life with him. I had been a director of public safety and security for 6 different properties in LA County. I'd just gotten $11,000 a year raise. I'd gotten raises for all of my employees. I was really established and doing well for the first time really in my life. And I dropped everything to get this fiance visa and moved to Scotland. And it took that man 7 years to get me there. And it took him 7 days to start trafficking me.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Wow. Talk about grooming. What a patient person he was.
Yeah. And I have to believe that it was happening to other people also,
Of course.
because when you're having video chats with somebody a few times a week or even every day, there's a lot that they can hide from you.
Oh, absolutely. Sounds like his full-time job.
Yeah. I mean, his full time job really was being a police officer,
Ah,
but he was doing this on the side.
okay.
And I got all the way out there. The first 7 days were pretty much cheesecake. They were wonderful. I got to go wherever I wanted as long as he was with me. I got to visit with whomever I wanted as long as it was his family. I got to explore the state as long as he was with me. So I was having this great experience of seeing castles and wandering old ancient Roman ruins. I used to sit on the walls of Roman baths built in 149 AD to be able to sit and eat a picnic lunch. It was incredible, the kind of history I was immersed in. And that first 7 days was just fantastic. I mean, there was a lot of snow on the ground. It was January of 2011. So the Roman baths came, later on. But it was a beautiful place.
Okay.
And when the abuse started, immediately I wanted to go home. But I couldn't whine and start complaining and saying, I want to go home. I had given up everything to be with this man. I sold my car. I left my job. I couldn't go back to that. I had struggled most of my life. I'm a high school dropout with no college education. What was I going to do? Where was I going to go? So it took me a little while to realize this is only getting worse. This is not going to get better. It's getting worse. He had taken my passport and my driver's license, debit card, all that stuff away from me pretty quickly, pretty early on. I needed to get that back if I was going to get out of there. So one night when the abuse was happening, I fell back on old waitressing habits. I had been a waitress in a diner when I was 16. And I remembered the importance of keeping a coffee cup full. And that night I did that with his whiskey cup.
Okay.
Every time he started getting about half down, I would top it off. And it wasn't just the little bits of whiskey at the bottom of the glass like you see typically in a bar. He was getting a full glass. Okay. At the end of the night, I told him, I can go down to the bank and go get my money out of the bank and we can spend it if you give me back all of my stuff. I can go down there tomorrow and do it. And what I did instead was jump on the computer and try to get a flight out. The first flight out was over $12,000 and I couldn't afford it. I only had a little over $2,000 in my bank. It was my car that I sold was garbage, basically. It was a little beater. So I had to wait and I had to look further and further and further out. And the first flight out that I could afford was actually 5 days away.
Okay.
And I did that same thing that we do to each other and that we do to ourselves all the time that I did when I was in Las Vegas. And I told myself, I've been through worse. I can get through this too. And I knew when I was telling myself this that it was a lie. I had never been through anything worse.
Mm.
But getting through this too was one of the scariest parts of what happened to me. During that 5 days, the abuse escalated so badly that I ended up with a kidney infection and was in the hospital when the flight took off, and it was a non-refundable flight. I had $11 left in my bank. Couldn't get another emergency flight out for $11. I lost hope. I eventually tried to take my own life. It was going to be suicide by train. And the only thing that stopped me was a little 4-year-old boy who walked out onto the platform and looked at me like he knew me.
Mm.
He saw right through me. He saw the pain I was in. It was the first time anybody in possibly years knew me, including me. And it took me a few seconds to realize that this is what I'd been praying for the longest time. It's just for somebody to see me. And rather than running towards the train, I was running back towards my prison. And I've always been a Christian at heart. I didn't know that much about the Bible, and I still don't because I'm still studying and still trying to learn. But that day, I was thanking God for this miracle that I hadn't yet received, because I knew that if I was going to be kept alive in that moment, there had to be a greater purpose for my life. There had to be something more for me out there. So I started leaving little breadcrumb trails. I started leaving these little breadcrumbs, making this man believe that I had developed what we used to call Stockholm syndrome, we now call trauma bonding, and that I had developed it so deeply that I would do anything for this man and I wasn't going to complain anymore. And this was throughout what's known as sport torture. Okay. So sleep deprivation of up to 8.5 days, as far as I can remember. I think that might be a little fuzzy. You start hallucinating after a few days. Right. There was food deprivation. I lost 78 pounds while I was there for the first 5 months. Okay. There was waterboarding. All of this stuff had happened. All of this stuff was continuing to happen sporadically just for sport. And I stopped complaining about it. I stopped screaming out in fear. I started to force myself to go emotionally numb. Mm-hmm. And he started to really believe that I truly did love him and would do anything for him. And I wasn't going to complain. I wasn't going to tell anybody what was happening. And one day I told him, I said, my fiance visa, we picked out a date for when we were supposed to get married, and that day is come and gone. And if I overstay my visa, you could lose your job as a police officer. And I could get kicked out of the UK and never allowed back according to UK laws. But if you send me back and I go back fairly soon, I can come back in 6 months, and that would be just in time for Christmas. And it would be our first Christmas together. And wouldn't that be beautiful? Mm. Within 2 hours, he bought me a round trip flight to get me out of there. I got back to California on June 19th of 2011. I had lost my dignity, my self-respect, any that I had ever gained. I had lost my will to live. I'd lost 78 pounds. I lost me. I lost who I was. And I didn't know how I was going to get it back. And it took me years to rebuild anything of what I'd once had. I gained the weight back pretty quickly. I got that back before anything else. But I was still struggling for a long time trying to figure out what I was going to do and how I was going to survive. He kept continually attacking me. He had taken photos and videos of me during rapes and molestations and was sending them to anybody that he found out I was connected to. I would get a job. He would send it to my boss. I'd lose the job. I would make a friend. He'd send it to the friend. I'd lose the friend. At one point, he sent it to somebody that I thought was my best friend, and she couldn't understand how this would happen without somebody's permission. So she started telling people I had been a high priced call girl because she couldn't understand it. It
She was under a
hurt.
rock.
Well, it was 2011. Human trafficking still wasn't something people were talking about. And even if they were, it
Rape
looked
was
like
around
them.
though.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But how does it happen to somebody repeatedly? It goes back to that same question of, didn't you learn anything the first time? That's what she thought in her mind. And when this is happening repeatedly by the same person over and over and over, why are you still there? Why didn't you just run? Why didn't you get out? It had to be your choice. And it hurt. It hurt bad.
Of course.
Eventually, I had lost basically everything. And I decided, you know what, there's nothing holding me here anymore. And I finally, in 2016, I left California, moved out to Colorado, which is where I am now. And in 2019, I found out that he'd made me famous on a pornography website. He couldn't attack me personally anymore, so he was going to attack me globally.
Right.
And he included whatever social media information he could on me so that people could find me, they could follow me, they could reach out and contact me. And I was recognized in a grocery store one day by somebody who asked me for my autograph, not because I was on Alias or Will and Grace or had modeled for all these different companies, because he saw me being raped on a pornography website. It broke me. I reached out to two different anti-trafficking organizations. One of them paired me up with pro bono legal services to reach out to these pornography websites and take the stuff down. Every time one came down, two more went up. So then I reached out to the other one and they paired me up with a therapist who I traumatized so badly she's left the industry. Poor thing had no idea what she was getting in for. So then they paired me up with a second therapist who was wonderful. And at that point, I had talked to the first one enough to know what I needed.
Okay.
And I went in with this mentality and I told her right off the bat, number one, don't come at me right away with prescription medication. I don't want a Band-Aid. I need a shovel.
Okay.
Number two, don't treat me like I am some fragile porcelain doll. If I was going to break, I'd have done it already.
Yeah, you would have.
And I was ready to do the work. I had to hit rock bottom to be ready to do the work. At the end of the therapy is when I wrote my book. At the end of writing my book is when the therapist told me, I want you to start painting. And now my books and my art have sold worldwide.
Okay. Okay. Good on you. Good on you. I'm thankful for MacGyver. I'm thankful for that little boy. I'm also thankful for the part of you that was open to the message the little boy brought. I'm thankful for the part of you that even though your upbringing sounded horrific, that you were still connected enough to your true self to want to be free and save yourself. That takes a tremendous amount of strength, given what you were faced with, that we tend to only look at weakness when we are being harmed or in these prolonged situations of distrust and manipulation and abuse. It takes strength to survive that. It takes strength to move past that. And it takes strength to thrive beyond that. So good on you.
Thank you.
Good on you. Okay. Collecting myself. That's powerful stuff. That is powerful stuff. So what's next? Where do you go from here? Where do survivors go from here?
So I was a part of a small group of human trafficking survivors here in Colorado. It was through an anti-trafficking organization that was offering life skills classes to survivors. We also did like art projects. We went on hikes. We'd have barbecues. And just being in that sense of community was hugely helpful and healing in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that is lacking within some organizations, I won't say all, but in some, is that when this survivor starts to gain their independence, they are dismissed from the group. and they lose this sense of community.
Okay.
And it's not because the organization doesn't have the funds to be able to support them anymore, but rather because they don't need the organization anymore. And they don't want people around who don't actually need them or depend on them. It's very hurtful. Yeah. So I have started my own trauma recovery mentorship. I have a private locked down group on Facebook where we can get together and we can have this sense of community. And this sense of community is going to last. It is not something that is just going to flippantly be erased from your life unless you obviously break the rules and do something drastic,
Right.
or you decide that it's time for you to move on. This group is here. We are here to support, not here to trauma vomit, which is what I call it when somebody's talking about the ugly side of everything that's happened to them, but just to have that sense of community, just to know that you're not alone. The trauma recovery mentorship has been a great big help to me too, as I'm mentoring other people how to deal with trauma reactions and to understand what stage of trauma they're in. I understand occasionally a little bit more about my own journey because something always comes up.
Yes.
Always.
Yes. Yes. Well, and just thinking about the organization that kicks survivors out because they're gaining independence and strength and those kinds of things seems to me more traumatizing because as you said, they lose that sense of connection, and the other people in the group lose a role model.
Yeah. And there's no guarantee that this person is gaining their independence and that's gaining stability. There's
Right.
no guarantee that this stability is going to last because inevitably something always comes up to make us feel a little less stable in our lives. No matter who we are,
Mhm.
something is going to happen at some point. And when you're a survivor of severe trauma like this, your brain automatically goes to the darkest of places as to what is going to happen because of this instability. And you feel like you can no longer turn to this organization that helped you in the past. They kicked you out. I have no one now.
Right. Yeah, that's very sad to me. Very sad. So let's give the audience an idea of what trafficking actually looks like. Oh, you were very descriptive in your experiences, though I think there are a lot of misconceptions about
Yes.
trafficking, that it's all just young girls and sex work. So break down, what's the general is there a general demographic of trafficking?
It happens quite often to people around the age of 18.
Okay.
Um, the average age for children that are in trafficking is between 12 and 14 for girls, 10 and 12 for boys.
Okay.
And 1/4 of all victims are under the age of 18. So that's a massive misconception. We have this misguided belief here that it only happens to underage children when it's actually only 1/4 of all victims being underage children.
That was
The
a
oldest,
surprise to me.
yes. The oldest person here in Colorado in recent years to have been pulled out of trafficking was actually in her 70s. The
Wow.
youngest was 3 months old.
Okay.
So there's a huge span of age. The last time I was trafficked, when I was in Scotland, I was 31 years old. It really can happen at any age to anybody. All it takes is somebody who is needing something in their lives and for a predator to understand what that need is and try to fulfill that need. That's how they suck them in, and that's how they exploit them.
Yes.
Another huge misconception.
Let me just say that I tell my clients who have poor boundaries that psychopaths are really good at reading people. They're really good at picking up on what you think you lack and what you need and what's missing, that void, and will do whatever they need to pretend to fill it,
Yeah.
to hook you. So thank you for saying that. It's not just coming from me. You got to be aware.
Yep, absolutely. And if you're posting on social media, that's another thing to be aware of. Or if you have children that are posting on social media, watch what hashtags they're using. Because if you've got a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid on Instagram who's using the hashtag lonely or so alone
Oh
or
my
something
gosh.
along those lines,
Yes.
it's an instant magnet for these guys.
Yes. Yes.
So, another huge misconception, of course, is that this only happens to women and girls or a very small percentage of boys. Men and boys make up 46% of all people being trafficked. And
Okay.
that's a massive misconception. Another one is that we believe that most human trafficking scenarios happen with kidnapping. That makes up about 1 to 2%, I learned recently.
Holy crap.
Most people are trafficked exactly as I was in all three scenarios by people who you think you can trust, people who you think care about you, and who have a sense of authority over your life. The second you depend on them, they have that ability to exploit you. Many, many people are exploited from their own homes by parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, and sometimes boyfriends and girlfriends, like, boyfriends or fiancés in my case,
Mm-hmm.
and occasionally by other kids at school. They will use naked images to blackmail another child at school and say, if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, I'm going to share this with everybody in school, or I'm going to share this with your parents, or I'm going to put this up on Facebook or on Instagram. And they follow through with their threats. And these kids are absolutely terrified. But every single person that receives an image, an exploitation image of a kid that's still in school, a kid under the age of 18, that is one federal offense.
For child porn.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
And the person who sends it out gets a charge for every single person they send it to if they're discovered. So if there's kids out there, you got to stop being afraid that somebody's going to share this. Yes, it's embarrassing that there's this photo of you that exists in the first place, but you got to do something about it before it gets worse.
Right. Right. Okay. Now, I read something on the Department of Homeland Security website that 71% of forced laborers in the U.S. are legal. We tend to think that it only happens to illegal aliens.
Yes, that's very true also. And a
Okay.
lot of that happens with people that are looking for housing situations. Housing has become so astronomically expensive out here that people are now saying, oh, come and stay with me. All you have to do is work in my restaurant for free.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And there's this assumption that human trafficking is only about sex work.
Yes, there is. And human trafficking, sex trafficking specifically, only takes about 14% of all human trafficking
Oh
globally.
my gosh, that is so misportrayed in the mainstream media.
It's because they're looking for the stories that can be sensationalized. If
Yes.
it's not sensational enough,
Yes.
they don't want to cover it.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is why voices like mine and voices like so many survivors are being squashed and silenced. It's
Yes.
because we're not sensational enough. I wasn't 14 when I was trafficked. I wasn't snatched off the streets by some guy in a windowless van.
Stranger danger. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's not the strangers that are so dangerous anymore.
So if I'm forced to pick oranges on a farm, nobody cares. It's not
Right.
sensational enough.
Right. And that's mainly because of the numbers they're involved too. You might be forced to pick oranges alongside 500 other people in the same field.
Okay.
Why do they want to hear your voice when there's 500 in that same field, all crying to be heard?
I say rescue them all. And
Right.
then take their statements. Come on. We have to do better. We just have to do better. Um, so I also read that some of the industries which were surprising to me were like hospitality. And you mentioned working in someone's restaurant for free,
Yeah.
domestic work, maid service, agriculture, construction.
Yep. Construction, nail salons, hair salons. Yeah.
Okay. So on an individual level, you mentioned being aware of the danger signs, the red flags. What are some of those red flags for you?
The sense that somebody is manipulating you emotionally, physically, it doesn't matter. If they begin to start to manipulate you and say, well, if you really love me, you'll do XYZ.
Yes, emotional
Even
black.
if it's right, even if it's something as innocuous as, if you really love me, you'll sweep the front walk. If they're using emotional blackmail, if you really love me, you will do this, it will get worse.
Yes.
They are testing the waters. They are starting slowly, and it will get worse. It will grow.
Okay.
Another one would be any kind of physical violence. When I was 18, I was dating a man who got very upset with me and turned around and slapped me on the leg. He says he didn't mean anything by it and he was just in jest. That's that's not okay. It doesn't matter if he's kidding and joking or not. Somebody strikes you, it is not okay, period.
Yes.
Because that will also escalate and they will eventually have this ability to force you into physically doing things under threat of violence, whether it's human trafficking or cooking dinner at a particular time. If they're going to be violent with you, that violence will get worse. There are several other red flags too, like having any kind of a controlling nature over who you communicate with, where you go, tracking you by putting a tracking device on your car or in your handbag, um, monitoring your social media, forcing you to give them the passcode to your phone.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things are of a controlling nature and they will escalate.
Okay. And I've I've worked with women, female women victims of domestic violence, and that control can be as subtle as you would look better in this dress.
Yep, absolutely. And I've known people to do that who have that same kind of experience with domestic violence. And it's rare, but you can occasionally find somebody who does say this, who doesn't mean to be manipulative. So there's kind of a fine line there on figuring out what the manipulation is.
Well, I like when you said have a sense that you're being manipulated, because to me, that's your intuition
Yeah.
saying, hey, pay attention, something's happening here.
Yeah. We have that intuition for a reason. We got to learn to listen to it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I do a lot of work around boundaries. And I see the boundaries as collectively as your innate alarm system, monitored by the intuition. And that intuition is there for that purpose. Well, one of the purposes of intuition is to help you know when you are in danger so you can heighten your awareness and be ready to act, to fight, flee, or freeze until the danger passes. So boundaries are huge for me in maintaining personal safety and integrity. So thank you for bringing these red flags to attention.
Absolutely. And I'd like to add to that the fight, flight, or freeze response.
Mm-hmm.
As a trauma survivor, sometimes none of those are the option.
Okay.
So we've added one kind of in my small group of survivors. We call it fight, flight, freeze, or please. You'll do anything to please the person because it's the only way that you're going to stop them from harming you.
Okay. And sometimes that's necessary.
Yep.
Yeah. And you figured that out. You figured
It
that out yourself.
sucks, but it's real.
Who
But it's
wants to
real.
be who wants to be nice to somebody who's harming you? That
Right.
that that does suck. And that's another layer of strength
Yeah.
to be able to pull it off.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. So what can we do if we suspect that human trafficking is going on? I did some work on the Women's Tennis Association tour, and in the bathroom stalls in the ladies' locker rooms, they had these posters about human trafficking, call this number if you suspect, etc. As a licensed massage therapist, we had to get that information as well. If one of our clients, we suspected them of being abused domestically or in human trafficking, what can the general public do if they suspect someone is being trafficked?
One of the first things to do is to educate yourself first on what trafficking looks like, because we
Okay.
have so many of these preconceived notions and misunderstandings of
True,
it.
true.
Human trafficking is often disguised as other things, also like domestic violence. There's been this saying for years now. It started out in a New York City subway: if you see something, say something.
Hmm.
That is the best thing that you can do.
Okay.
I constantly see on social media where somebody says, well, I heard this happen or I saw this happen and I'm not sure what to do about it. And I don't know if I should call the police. Yes, absolutely. If you see something that could be even slightly misconstrued as an emergency, let them figure it out.
Right.
That's the biggest thing. Another thing is, when I was wandering around on my way to the train station that day in Scotland, what I needed and wanted more than anything in the world right then was to have somebody ask me, are you okay? Because I couldn't find anybody who cared. And every single person who saw me walked right past me. They looked at me and looked away, and I could see it in their eyes. Not my circus, not my monkeys. It's not my problem. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm going to let somebody else deal with it. It is our problem. We are humanity. And if we don't stand up and do something to help our fellow man, how humane are we?
Not
We have
very.
it right.
Not
We
not
have to be willing to do something.
and even if it is just as small as to look someone in the eye and say hi.
Right,
How's your day going?
right.
You
In,
know?
Instead of doing this, looking in your phones, typing away, our only human connection so often these days is with people that are half a world away, typing into their computers on social media.
Hmm.
We are hardwired to need this sense of connection with other humans. We need to remember that. We need to put the phones down. We need to start paying attention to our fellow man and looking at the world around us, because these problems are only going to get worse the more disconnected we get.
Yeah. Um, I during the pandemic, with all the everything that went wrong that year, those 2 years, it occurred to me that indifference is the virus.
Yeah,
Forget this thing
that's
called COVID. It's indifference. And it's when we cut off and turn away from the humanity in another person that we allow these things to exist and to worsen. So just looking somebody in the eye, smiling genuinely, how are you doing? How's your day going? And just like, I mean, I'm visualizing that moment with you and the little boy, how powerful that was.
yeah, he was an incredible kid. And looking back, he was 4 in 2011. That was 12 years ago. The little boy is now 16 years old. And I have to wonder how he's doing, if he needs somebody to see him,
Hmm.
because this is a major problem amongst kids of that age right now.
Yeah.
And he'll probably never know that he saved my life. He'll never have any idea, because even if he sees by some chance an interview that I've done, or he hears a podcast that I'm on, he's not going to know that he was the little boy at the train station who made all the difference just by looking at me.
He may not know consciously, though his core recognizes your core.
I hope so. I hope so. Because if he's going through any kind of hard times as a teenager, because we all have,
Oh God.
maybe that'll get him through, right?
Yes, maybe. Okay. Now you mentioned also in your work about healing and taking control of your trauma. What does that mean?
Well, trauma rewires our brains in such a way that we have new reactions to different things that come up.
Hmm.
I have learned through my studies that we can actually fight back against these trauma responses, and in fact, should. at the time that they're developed, these trauma responses exist for a very good reason, and they are necessary. We do need them. They get us through whatever it is that we're having to face. But once we're done with this need, these things stick around because these neural pathways have already been built in our brain. If we don't learn how to fight back against them and stop having this negative reaction to something that reminds us of something from the past, all we're doing is reinforcing this bad behavior. This includes lashing out at people that we love, people that are in our lives who just want to help, people who haven't done anything wrong, but his nose is shaped like the other guy that hurt me. So I'm going to be mad at him for it.
Right.
He didn't do anything wrong to you. You got to retrain yourself. So a lot of this is about learning what the trauma reactions are, figuring out which ones are major points for you, figuring out which ones to attack first. Then you have to learn what the long-term consequences are of not fighting back against it, because they all lead to other things down the road. And it's important to understand what those things are so that you have more of a sense of, this is why I'm trying to fight this, because I don't want these things to happen later on.
Okay.
And then retraining your brain by finding better coping mechanisms, better ways to react, taking a moment to sit back and breathe, thinking about the five senses, and just kind of refocusing yourself and finding a better way to reframe and rethink and retrain your brain.
Yes. Yes. And I am so happy that survivors have you to look to as a role model and a source of inspiration and empowerment. So tell us all of the different ways you assist. You have the group, you wrote your book. What else do you do to help survivors heal?
So the trauma recovery mentorship is probably the biggest thing that I have going right now. I do one-on-ones. I am working on building group mentorships as well for people that are interested in that. And then I have a series of video modules that people can go through if they want to do this, but they don't want to have that one-on-one interaction because they're afraid of that. It does happen. A lot of people, when they get out of these dark places, they're not interested in sitting face to face with somebody. They are terrified of the world, and it can take a little while to kind of work back into it. So these video modules are kind of a great way of leading somebody back into that world of having this one-on-one interaction and being okay with talking about some of the stuff that's happened.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Now, how can anyone contact you if they want to join your group or do a consultation or get your book? Share with us your contact information.
So the easiest way to reach me is probably from the Growth from Darkness website. That's where you can also find more information on the books I've written, which there's now 13. They can get more information on the recovery mentorship programs, the group sessions, the podcast talking about the different trauma reactions. I've got all that stuff there. But if they're looking to just interact with me, there is a contact button. You can always use that, or you can find me on Facebook. I am far too active on Facebook to some degree. So reach out to me on Facebook. We can have a one-on-one chat, a conversation. We can converse openly through some of the posts and stuff. Just get to know me as a human being first, if that's going to make you feel more comfortable.
Okay, sounds good. Now, if you could narrow this huge issue down, what would be the one nugget, the one takeaway you want the audience to have?
We have grown up our entire lives being told that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And that's a lie. I love that you're already laughing at this. It's absolutely a lie. So this phrase was coined by Friedrich Nietzsche in the 1800s, 1844, I believe. And he later on died in an insane asylum. I think it's okay to let this one go. Philosophers get things wrong. It is not our abusers. It is not our abuse. It is not our traumas that make us stronger. We already had that strength down within us.
Mm-hmm.
We had to dig deep to find it, to get through the stuff that we've survived. And sometimes finding that strength means finding that help. Why do you think it's so hard to ask for help? It's because it's one of the strongest things that you can possibly do. And having a vulnerability is not a weakness. That is also a strength.
You are preaching to the choir. Oh my gosh, Amanda, you are awesome. Um, Congratulations to you and your family for how you blossomed and now thrive. I really appreciate the work you're doing and you being willing to share your story and help others in this situation and similar situations get out of it, heal from it, take control of their trauma, and then build the best lives that they can. So thank you so much for your strength.
Absolutely. And thank you. Thank you so much.
You are welcome. Please take care. Thank you again for tuning into this episode of The Glen Alex Show. We really hope that you learned something about human trafficking and are inspired to help. If nothing else, please shore up your boundaries so that you're not falling victim to manipulation, abuse, or even human trafficking. And please like, subscribe, and share this episode.
Refresh your spirit with a nourishing thought.
Please allow me to leave you with this nourishing thought. Author Laurie Foster said, "We tend to think of human trafficking as a foreign issue, not something that could happen here in our own backyards, but it's a fast-growing problem in the United States, in every area, and with no real defined demographic. You see, human trafficking is modern-day slavery, forcing children, women, and men into illicit sex, domestic work, hospitality, agriculture, and other industries. Human trafficking is a growing problem in the United States, so let's correct the faulty assumption that human trafficking only happens elsewhere, over there, and is only about sex work. Please educate yourself about human trafficking so that you can become part of the solution and help everyone improve individual, social, and global health. And please, please strengthen your own boundaries so that you can become more aware of the harms around you, which will enable you to act more quickly and more appropriately to protect yourself. To learn more about boundaries for safety, visit glenalex.com, order your copy of my 3-time award-winning book, Living in Total Health, take advantage of the BOGA special, and book your complimentary consultation with me to strengthen your boundaries for safety. Then tune in to the next episode of The Glen Alex Show, the 2023 Positive Change Podcast Award winner. And until next time, be well.
Joyful